Hello and welcome to the Senteon and CIS webinar series, episode 56 today, Rich. Is that what we're at to? Something along those lines.
I have no idea. Unfortunately, I've missed a few along the way, but you're the man, Zach. Thank you for doing it all.
If I could miss this series to go sailing across the Atlantic, I think I too would take a break.
It's priorities, I guess, ultimately.
Yeah, but this series is designed to educate and talk about the CIS recommendations. This series is specifically on Microsoft Edge hardening. So this is a 12-part series where we bring on special guests like Henry Tim here from Phantom Technology Solutions. Woohoo! And talk about these more in depth and just why they're important and the value of them. But before we get into that, a little bit of housekeeping on Senteon's side. We'll go ahead and pull up this screen. Senteon, again, is designed to perform the remediation on thousands of different CIS recommendations. And some of the things we're doing in the community include speaking at CornCon coming up next week, this week in Davenport, Iowa. Yes, I said CornCon. Absolutely incredible name. Next week, we will be talking about branding with Jason Mekovich from Greenlight Information Services, now Greenlight Cyber. So we're going to talk about kind of the importance of brand, what goes into that transition, and why it matters. After that, we will be doing a webinar with SendMark for talking about DMARC and email security and how that relates to really the foundations of cybersecurity best practices and CIS, right? That's really what I talk about in most of these. And again, these episodes are all recorded. They are all posted to our website afterwards. You can see them on our YouTube channel or right here. And we do write about blogs afterwards. And if you'd like to take advantage of this, you can create a free account with this login button right here. And you can test out the freemium or even deploy some of Senteon to see how it works.
Do it.
Appreciate that. Freemium right here looks like this. Yeah, be aware of all of the security gaps. I was talking to.
You may not like what you see, but
you may not. You may not like what Intune tells you is going on, and then realize it's not actually doing what it says. It's a beautiful thing that Microsoft does.
Trust but verify. Senteon verifies.
Right. So this is an example of the freemium. We do take all of the CIS recommendations you can see here, and we crosswalk them across regulatory or other best practice frameworks. We will be adding CompTIA Trustmark to this as well. So very excited for that. If you ever don't know a setting as well, you can click into it, read about the pathway, and CIS provides this beautiful information right here for us so that we can make this easy for everyone. And then why it crosswalks and everything else is also in here.
Yeah, all right. I mean, it's so cool because everyone knows the CIS benchmarks are awesome and super cool. However, they're detailed and complicated. So the settings are tricky. It's, if you're trying to do this stuff manually, good luck. You're not going to be successful. So you need tooling to operationalize the fantastic IP that CIS puts out. And Senteon's got your back.
I think that is what I'm going to kick Henry off with the first question, operationalizing configs. So there's your prep, Henry. That'll be coming at you after the overview. But
so important.
That's absolutely right, Rich. And what we're looking at here is these recommendations. You can run some scans with the allocated licenses on the freemium to see where you currently sit. And of course, if you want it to give Senteon the real test, perform remediation with us. We do this without Microsoft Medium, so no PowerShell, no Intune, no GPO. We are making these changes directly. All right, that's the overview. Henry Tim, welcome. I know I told you I was going to hit you with a question first, but we first need to know who you are. So, Indiana native, a friend of mine, tech degenerate, one of the co-founders, been an absolutely friend to the innovative community that Senteon is a part of and wanting to really just rise tides to the entire industry. Henry,
Zach, is
welcome.
Tech degenerate really a compliment?
I mean, that's what he called it. You got a background on the name right there, Henry.
There you go.
Yeah, no, that's we embrace
self-designated.
Yeah, no, I stumbled out of a cornfield as well, so
I like the country
here in northern Indiana. But yeah, Phantom Technology Solutions, the MSP that I own, serves primarily regulated industries here in northern Indiana, southwest Michigan, and then the Tech Degenerates is the MSP community that I co-founded with 9 other MSPs and vendors to kind of better serve the industry and kind of share resources and knowledge.
That's amazing. Thanks for doing that. So
Yeah,
cool.
no problem.
It's a lot of work, and I know you've
and
been
you very
traveling
much-
a lot. Tell us about
Yeah.
your travels really quick.
Yeah, you're huge in the community, brother. Where you been this last month?
Oh gosh. Let's see. I've been bouncing around. I was in New York, Baltimore, Orlando, Denver, Chicago. I'm now home for 2 weeks before going off to Berlin and London for we got CompTIA EMEA coming up and PAX 8 EMEA coming up, but obviously very involved also with CompTIA in general. I'm on their cybersecurity global task force as well as
Nice.
a member of the channel development advisory council over there. So try and do what I can anywhere I can, different events and organizations.
Love CompTIA, CIS members.
And
anything to help give back.
So good.
And definitely want to advocate for you personally, right? I already hinted at it, but you, along with the other tech degenerates, are very much supportive of the innovative companies out there with the input you've given Senteon and the growth along the way. So thank you for what you do with the community. As you can tell from that intro, very mature on the security front, something we're all striving towards. Rich said this kind of in when he was kind of sharing about processing and making a procedure out of configurations. Talk to us a little bit about this process, procedures, and how it relates to configuration management.
Gosh, you mean that tools aren't the end-all be-all for everything?
You can't just put a template and never look at it again?
Set it and forget it.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of misconception in the end-user market specifically around that everything is secure by default, that you buy something and out the gate that it's
You would expect that. That
Yeah.
would be your general expectation. Why wouldn't you expect that?
That would be nice, but configurations matter, people matter, process matters, and the technology is just one piece of that. So CIS is a great framework for identifying and putting in place the responsibilities for the people that are maintaining the process and procedures that are controlling that framework and making sure that you are following through and doing the things that need to be doing the needful. And keeping that on a consistent schedule. So I know some of the controls specifically call out certain frequencies and intervals that things need to be done. I'm sure we'll probably dig into some of that today.
We definitely
Henry,
will
I'm
be.
sure you're well aware of what PAX 8 is doing around the CIS controls, which is super cool.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to, find solutions to help you achieve, say, IG1 in the CIS controls, or even implementation group 2, IG2, PAX 8 will map out various vetted cloud-based solutions that you can just, kind of take a lot of the work out of the process and, grab that stuff if you're trying to comply to the CIS controls framework. PAX 8's got your back. They've got really cool solutions picked out that you can deploy immediately.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I was one of the individuals along with Zach here and several others to work with alongside Matt Lee on developing out that
so good
that guide. It's a fantastic resource. A lot of it was humbling to be in a room.
That's a word choice.
Yeah, we had some CIS contributed pretty heavily, I believe. I know he did.
Yeah, for sure.
We had some really smart people engaged in that.
Amazing work.
Not me,
to be
of
part of.
Yeah, I will be bringing that up at my CornCon presentation as well. I love shouting out the PDF. I'll drop the link into the chat, but there is I guess the previous rough draft version that is publicly available, and I think they're standardizing a lot of it now. So very excited to have Senteon part of that. Awesome to hear the praise that you're giving it as well. The big thing I want to shout out with this, whether you follow a framework or you don't, right? Following CIS, which obviously in nature is a framework, and aligning your vendors to that allows you to see where you might have, a ton in this area, but you're missing this area. Here, this area you have, right? You're identifying gaps through frameworks, not just your intuition. So very much am an advocate.
And if you follow the CIS guidance, you need to close those gaps, because we base our guidance, as we'll see in the later slides, based on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And if you've got gaps there,
Oh yeah.
it's not good for you, because these, our guidance is based upon the most common attacks that are happening today. And you really need to think about that.
I think why CIS has gained such a foothold especially amongst the MSP community, is that it's so prescriptive. It's something that is easily understood and tells you exactly what you need to go and do.
However, not always easy to operationalize. And that's why we got
Very
Zach in our corner.
That is the challenge, right? Find vendors who help with that operationalizing perspective.
Henry,
and
Zach, they got your back.
That's awesome. So absolutely great. And yes, we will be getting into that. And honestly, per the new sequence of events, let's go ahead and pull up some of these slides. And I'll kind of preface one thing with the MITRE attack that we talked about. So I was having a discussion with Dustin Bolander. I'm sure you're familiar with him, Henry, but very active in the cyber insurance community, but also very mature MSP, very high security background. And he was very impressed because when I sent him the CSV of Senteon exports, since we do all those crosswalkings, seeing which setting related to which MITRE attack technique really surprised him just about how much coverage is covered by simply configs alone, right? You look at the Verizon DBIR, I think the number 2 recommendation is change default configs, fix misconfigs, right? So this concept, this weekly webinar series we do matters. This is stuff.
Zach, did he comment from an insurance perspective regarding what was his, just from an insurance perspective?
Yep.
It's so important for everybody. What was his comments?
There's definitely going to be some things coming out between us and him, and I'm also working with DataStream, so you're going to see a lot more of the.
You connected me with, isn't it?
Yeah, you're going to see a lot more alignment between cyber insurance and configs, because the big thing here is, big thing from the insurance perspective is not only that it's in place, but being able to attest at the real time and state that it's in place, and that is one advantage that Senteon has, because we do actually provide that, while Microsoft can't even do that. But regardless, these configs are becoming more important from the insurance perspective. I'll have Dustin and DataStream. We're talking about doing webinars together, so we'll dive into that at another time. Henry, we got benchmarks. Before we fully transition,
we got Henry. We're good.
Yep. Before we fully transition, did you want to make any comments on cyber insurance? Any trends you're seeing before we get into the technical weeds?
I think it's just interesting to see cyber insurance really driving the discussion happening around, what the defensibility is in those decisions. And CIS is kind of really the meat and potatoes behind giving that defensibility in those decisions. So I think a lot of MSPs, thankfully, are starting to look at these frameworks and adopting them in a way so that they can have that discussion with their clients about why they chose what they did. It wasn't just, we got a special on this tool that we thought looked good at a conference. There's a reason and a means and method behind those decisions.
Yep, absolutely. And you said the key word that I've been trying to use more and more in my conversations, defensibility, right? Many MSPs probably do have that one Intune engineer, that one engineer in-house who does know a ton. They can do anything with a PowerShell script, right? At the end of the day, just because they can do something and it's their gut instinct to do something, is it really defensible if an incident does happen and you have to defend that choice? Or would you rather have someone like CIS?
Shame on that guy. People do what they know. I mean, that's what that individual knows.
If that guy could say, I did this because I followed this framework and because CIS told me to, it makes a much stronger argument than saying my gut told me to do this.
No offense, Rich. I would prefer CIS to own that liability rather than me. So
right?
They got our back, right?
Yeah.
Spoken like a true MSP.
I love it. All right, let's kick into some of these settings. So the very first one here, if we can pull that on up, is ensure auto launch protocols component is enabled, which is recommended to disabled. Again, these GPOs, I write them verbatim as they're logged in the system. A lot of times they're confusing, but the point here is anytime I see anything auto and launching put together, probably not something I want enabled. As CIS recommends here, disable this. What does this actually mean though?
So I think what we're getting at here is that a lot of malicious software and websites back in the day used to just kind of overwrite some of these auto launch protocols so that as soon as you would launch to the home page, it would inject a phishing attempt, or you'd have these drive-by downloads or malvertising that would get injected into your browsing. So I
Man,
think
you're talking about all the MITRE attack techniques.
yeah, so
Nailed it.
disabling this is key, so that you don't open yourself up to a lot of those attack vectors.
Yep. And the biggest thing I want to emphasize here, and you hinted at this, is something like this basically skips the user interaction point. So just when something launches, it'll be able to do whatever it wants without asking permission or doing, the checks and balance, right? It's not going to say, are you sure? Are you going to, choose a pathway? It's just saying this will automatically happen. Doesn't matter.
Just go for it.
Yeah.
Good or bad.
Yep. So definitely disable this one. Great example there. This next one here, man, this one is talked about, I think, automatically import another browser's data and settings at first run is set to enabled, which means disabled automatic import, and the import section on the first run experience is skipped. Could this ever accidentally be importing sensitive data to somewhere it shouldn't, Henry?
What's the worst that could happen? Yeah.
Why? I mean, this syncing thing, I mean, this isn't necessarily talking about syncing. This is talking about imports, similar, right? But I mean, this has to make the MSP's life much easier being able to do this, right? Having the ability to do this is probably going to ease a lot of pain. But why is it a little dangerous? Why do we want to harden this setting?
Well, one is you're worrying a little bit about your attack surface here. So you want to maintain control over where that data is for the end user. But you're also looking at potential malicious actors exploiting those connections coming into the browser. So if you're importing something without any idea of necessarily control over where it's coming from, there are potentially malicious content that you're ingesting into the potential clean browser.
Yep. You don't necessarily know for fact what you are importing, right? So this is saying, hey, it's not worth the risk at that first run. You're going to have to reset it up, or maybe there is a more, again, CIS's recommendations assume you do not have a third-party choice to make the streamlined process easier. They're just talking about the things that are built into applications, built into the OS. So in this case, they say this is not safe to do.
No, you don't really know. I mean, what settings are you importing along the way?
Yeah,
right.
There's
Who
a
knows?
ton here.
Let's get into proxy DNS and all that good stuff.
Plenty we can dive into with DNS and browser, but we won't.
So tempting.
It's very tempting, right?
So
perfect explanation here. The next setting here, constantly talked about, especially GDPR, cookies. I agree to just the select cookies, right? But this is referring to third-party cookies, and CIS is recommending to enable, meaning block third-party cookies. So this isn't even talking about the website's cookies that I'm on. Is that what this is saying here?
Yeah, so third parties can utilize those cookies to effectively track you across sites. And so by blocking this, you're limiting the potential exposure that you might have across sites, and some of that tracking and privacy features as well.
Right. So this may not even be the website that you're on that gets the cookie data. This is a website you never even went to, never even heard of, that potentially is ingesting that type of data.
Yeah. No, Facebook is a good example of this, where they've got their platform that even if you don't have a Facebook account, as I understand it, they are able to build out a profile around your user data.
Love that.
Great. This would be a setting that would absolutely help protect you in that scenario.
If we bring up Facebook, I feel like it's only fair to also bring up LinkedIn, that special new setting of automatically ingest
Also
for
fair.
our AI data anything you post. Have we disabled that, Henry? Are you up to date on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
I
that
don't know if I have, honestly.
disabled.
I need to know about that.
Yeah, the whole AI extravaganza that's going on and data governance piece of that is a fight to be had out still in public, I think. But a lot of people, I don't think, recognize the true breadth of their data out there on the web.
Yeah. What to kind of talk towards the trends of AI and all this data ingestion as well, on the Windows OS, they are adding, and I'm sure only going to be adding more, some of these AI settings that are turned on by default. So as CIS continues to do their research and continues to update their recommendations, I imagine some of those AI policies that are enabled by default will also be recommendations we talk about on this webinar series.
Mm-hmm. From a CIS perspective, you know, we're very focused around AI, and in general, our whole company just went through an internal AI, you know, use and acceptability training and things like that, and we're trying to, you know, figure out our recommendations and such as well. So more to
You
follow
sound
from
so
CIS.
excited talking about this, Rich.
Thank you.
Well, to that point, though, is I mean, there's a lot of MSPs and end users that don't truly comprehend how their data is being utilized necessarily by an AI engine, whether that's local to Microsoft or some third party that they're utilizing as well.
Yep. And while we're on the topic of AI, let's just show this next setting, and we can even take this a little bit further as to why AI might want this data. So this next setting here, I believe a block tracking, hit this next slide, moderator, block tracking of users' web browser. All right, maybe moderator stepped away. So until that changes, block tracking of users' web browsing activity is set to enabled, meaning balanced. So this is a little interesting because it sounds to me like CIS isn't recommending to block all tracking because that must mess up functionality to too much of an extent. So they weren't able to just say, don't do it at all. But we were just talking about AI here, right? Why would AI maybe want your tracking, your data about your web browsing activity? How can AI leverage that to maybe make you click that new fish, maybe make you perform an action, right? This web browsing activity, sorry, I'm stealing the question from what I'm trying to ask Henry, but Henry, talk towards before I keep going.
No, you're right on path there. Is obviously there's a advertising play here. There is a potential phishing aspect to this as well, where you're able to track that user's behavior across sites.
They understand what you're interested in, what your hot buttons are, so they're going to give you your hot button.
Yep. No, and good example of some of this tracking that takes place is you can go to your Google account and see a profile they've built out on you on what age group they think you're in, what they think your preferences are, if they think you're married or single or divorced, or they build out a whole detailed profile that's built around that browsing data. And so if you can do something like this to implement some of that tracking protection, you're limiting, again, that scope of the attack, potential attack surface, as well as some of that data sprawl.
Yep. And I mean, that's what all of this is about, right? These CIS benchmarks we talk about week in and week out is primarily from the security perspective, but an aspect I don't always call out as well as we maybe could is the privacy aspect, right? Privacy is it is different than security, right? You're trying to protect your privacy. There are security settings you can change to better protect privacy. But alas,
if I could add one more thing, Zach and Henry, is, you know, the more and more of this data is collected, I mean, the bad guys are going to increasingly find more use cases to use it. And I mean, it's going to increasingly become more of a problem over time as AI matures and more of this data is collected.
Yeah.
Well, and another aspect to this that doesn't necessarily apply as much to the U.S. market, but the GDPR CCPA side of this, of if you're implementing
you
that,
can't do it. You're not supposed to anyway.
Yeah, not supposed to, but yeah, this is holding them honest, keeping them honest there. Yes.
Yeah. Spot on. And let's talk a bit of a trend perspective. Obviously, being an MSP that focuses on security and doing the right foundational activities, you know, these settings, these privacy aspects we talk about can heavily influence a phishing email to be more targeted or more likely to be clicked on, as we talked about. Are you seeing any trends with more enhanced phishing, more targeted attacks, or are you still seeing more generic mass market attacks?
Yeah, actually, I've had myself impersonated
There you go.
to my staff here. So that's
I was going to go with
not,
Instagram. You're super
you
handsome.
know, thank you. No, the so I've seen that happen. Obviously, we've seen some news articles out there about what was the company that had the AI generated Zoom call.
I heard
Where,
about, yeah, we talked
yeah,
about that briefly
and they
once.
transferred
Insane.
millions of dollars.
Insane. Do
It's
you want to
crazy.
refresh people on that? Because that's a crazy story.
Oh gosh. So the attacker in that scenario, if I recall correctly, had used a lot of collected information in order to impersonate a VIP in that organization.
CFO, I believe.
With generative, they used generative AI around their video connection to live stream across, I believe it was Zoom, to convince that they needed to make a large transfer of money. I believe it was several millions of dollars.
Yeah,
And
it's my understanding.
You assume that the person, if they've got all the details about the individual, if they're on a video call with you and they appear to sound like that, then it sounds like a duck, talks like a duck, must be a duck.
Send the wire.
Yeah. So obviously, things are escalating there as far as from a security standpoint.
Absolutely crazy.
They're getting smart. They're putting these tools to use against us. So.
Yep. And I did drop that link into the comments section, but yeah, $25 million, and it was a CFO, right? They couldn't tell apart whoever the CFO was talking to, couldn't tell the difference because it was so tailored. And so they had enough private data, enough privacy information that was available to tailor that AI to make a convincing.
You guys run businesses. Someone could do that to you guys.
Yeah. No, and that's we've started recommending for some of our VIP clients that they look into data broker removal services and things of that nature, just to try and limit that impact and scope.
Yep. Good stuff.
That's a vector that that came out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
It did come rapidly. Right as soon as it became available to the masses, it's like the bad guys picked it up first.
For sure.
So, all right, this next setting here. So ensure browser sign-in settings is set to enabled, which means disable browser sign-in. This confuses me, Henry. I need to use my browser. What the heck is this meaning?
Yeah, so there's a few things around this. I mean, yes, it's a convenient thing, but as far as the personalization goes, but you're reducing that data exposure by having your passwords, your bookmarks, and so forth that you would potentially have synchronized across different browsers and machines or devices. If you can limit that scope down and control that, that's ideal here. So
I mean, that's the collection point right there, basically.
Yeah, it really is. And to kind of even expand further on this setting, and this is just GPO being amazing verbiage, right? It's browser sign-in settings, disable browser. This isn't saying like you can't use a browser. You literally can't sign in. It's really referring to the automatic sign-in aspect, if I understand this correctly. Yep. So this is just saying no auto sign-in.
Just don't sign in. I mean, that's
this is going to require you
profile. They're building your profile from that sign-in and everything you do afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. So very much is just an extra layer of maybe an inconvenience, but by putting that extra layer, forcing you to input your password or input whatever it is to get to that browser makes things a little bit more secure.
Well, and then there's the device hijacking aspect of it too, is that you're putting an extra layer or barrier in place of a device hijacker where they can't impersonate you as easily with all of those things auto logged in.
Yep. And one thing to also just call out on the slide. So in the bottom right, if this is your first time joining us, I do list the level of the settings. So level 1 is recommended for any business to be doing. CIS does come up with these recommendations. And this setting here, like I said, it's adding an extra layer. It's going to be extra work on that end user. So this is considered a level 2 because this will change the business workflows. This will create disruption or pain because now this layer is noticeable. It's not something just in the background no one will notice. They literally need to change their behavior if using this setting.
Requires thought or in general potentially training.
Yeah. Let's talk about training. Let's do another trend here, Henry. So let's talk about working with your end clients, going through this process of configuration hardening, or picking up a new customer who's never had any config management. Do you do like a prep talk, like, hey, like there's going to be a lot of behavior changes? Like, how do you really transition a new customer to being okay with the things you want to do?
Yeah, so it's baby steps, in lots of communication. You have to borrow a little bit from Bill Campbell, who was on a previous episode. There
He
is
was
you
great.
have to over communicate with clients to
no one's going to fault you for that.
Keep them along, yeah, because you have to have their buy-in, and if you're going to truly change behavior and change their practices. So yeah, that's, we start off with, hey, we abide by this, the CIS standards, and specifically, we're going to try and implement implementation group 1 with you for this reason, and explain the whole defensibility behind it, and that cyber insurance is looking at things like this now as a litmus test for whether or not your business is mature, both as an MSP and as an end user, if the insurability of them. So
you do say the word CIS to your new customers and existing customers. This is a point of education you take advantage of?
It is, yeah. No, that's we want to be transparent with them. We want them to understand that, whether they're working with us or someone else, this is something that needs to be on the roadmap and is important to them.
Thank you for that, Henry.
Awesome overview there. All right, let's do this next setting here. And this one these settings always interest me personally. Clear browsing data when Microsoft Edge closes is set to disabled. We were just talking about, don't we want less things there? And if we can clear browsing data, don't we want to clear it? Why is CIS saying we should keep it in this scenario?
So I believe that the thought process behind this has to do with the ability for tracking and auditing. Is you want to know what a user potentially did or interacted, or if there was a threat actor on the device, what they may have done. And obviously, if you do not have browsing data to go through, you are not going to be able to do any digging into that, as well as diagnosing potential issues that the end user may have had tangentially.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And we've talked about some of these settings in previous episodes where they do contradict some of what we've talked about in the episode, but that's why there's so many granular settings, because CIS has already done the hard work.
There's a thought process behind it, and Henry did a tremendous job explaining that one, because it's not really obvious for this particular
It's not obvious, and that's what the best thing is, that CIS did this legwork to say, hey, this type of data, let's clear it. Don't keep that. But this type, we are going to keep it because of what Henry just said for the forensics process. Like, we need to, if you have a chalkboard or something.
Let's pause there, Zach, because CIS doesn't just push these out by super smart guys like me.
Totally, Rich. That's it. That's what the takeaway from the episode is.
No, we grab smart people like Henry and Zach, and we organize a worldwide group of experts that figure this stuff out. It's not just CIS. We bring a whole group of worldwide experts to consensus on what the proper settings are, and this is the result. So, it's not just us saying, thou shalt do this. It's a community effort, actually. It's pretty cool.
So us as MSPs or vendors that perform CIS hardening, we blame CIS if anything were to be wrong. CIS just blames the entire community.
It's a good thing you have strong shoulders there, Rich.
No one ever takes the blame.
I got a fake shoulder.
I love it. But yeah, that's a perfect explanation for this setting. And the next one here, let's show this because it's very similar, right? It's saying, hey, the clear cached images and files when Microsoft Edge closes. We also want to disable this. This is also important potential forensics information. Henry, I don't know if you want to expand on this more. It's very similar, but anything you want to add to this one?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are performance benefits to it as well, but really I think this is getting back to that forensics and audit data.
Exactly. Yeah, not too much to say, but other than call out, a lot of these settings tie in together. If you do one and not the other, I mean, that's kind of what's
Partial
the point of
protection.
starting the run if you're not going to finish the run, right? And to
You're
that end,
opening, you're cutting Swiss cheese. You know, you're leaving some holes.
sheesh, that's a good one. But yeah, to that point exactly, and then like you don't have to do all this at once, right? These are different types of settings. You can do some, just make sure you do the rest later, right? Senteon helps with that process and procedure aspect to make exception groups. You can of course do this in other mediums, whether that's an Excel workbook or whatever traditional
Zach,
style
let's
you
talk
have.
about that. There are
Yeah,
exceptions,
sure.
right? There's exceptions. Henry knows that. It's not one size fits all. And, you know, exceptions we deal with. We
Yeah,
document
let's
them
talk about
and we
dealing with
protect
those
around it,
actually,
right?
Rich. That's a good call out. So Henry, when you do come across a setting that maybe is too impactful or the client you already talked to them
Happens.
and they're like,
Something
absolutely
it's not
not,
going to
I
happen.
will not put my password there. I need quick access, right? How does that conversation look? Do you always let the customer win? Do you just say yes, or how does that look?
Usually we're trying to mitigate the risk by limiting the scope of it as much as possible, if it's a true necessity. But obviously, at first, we're going to determine what the true business case need is for that.
Start there, yeah.
And then, isolating it and mitigating it by scoping that as tightly as possible, and then documenting things as best we can as well.
Love that.
Good example, I guess, would be around like a machine shop or manufacturing, because they've, they
got Windows NT running a machine.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And is there any and again, like just kind of talking towards best practices, and maybe if you can talk about how Phantom handles this, is there like a reviewer approver process? Is there a review every quarter process documented? Anything like that for ongoing?
So for our change management, yes, there is an ongoing review process. We have that set up as semi-annual
Okay.
in our case, but depending on the client and the risk that is in place, we may review
Sure.
that on a more frequent basis.
Henry, let me ask you this, and maybe you don't even want to answer, but
Sheesh, where are you going with this one? It's a live webinar, brother.
Zach's like, no, stop, mute him. Henry, have you ever had a customer approach you and you kind of evaluate their infrastructure and you take a pass? You're like, can't do this.
Oh yeah.
How does that go? And how do you check out a place to decide if there's maybe too much risk for you to accept as an MSP?
Yeah, and that's part of our initial risk assessment that we do with clients before we onboard them.
Sure. Once you onboard them, it's on you.
Yep, and there are clients that we've fired because they just don't understand that their liability is also our liability that we have to, in some ways, own. So if they're not willing to see the value and understand the purpose behind why we're adopting some of the security practices that we are, then typically we'll have a discussion about, okay, well, maybe it's best that we part ways, and we'll try and align you with someone that may provide the services that you're looking for.
You have to. It's critical. It's your reputation.
Exactly. And it's just not worth us sitting on that risk for some situation.
Zach's going to have the reputation session coming up.
I actually do. Yeah. Thanks for the call out on that one too. See you next week with Jason. So one more question on this to tie up, and it's kind of a trend I'm seeing, and I'm curious how you're handling this or if you're also seeing the same trend. When you're taking on this new customer, you said it yourself, right? You perform a risk assessment. Is this typically a paid engagement, or is this like a free offering so that you can leverage it to close the deal? Are you seeing a trend on one side or the other?
So we used to assign a dollar value to it and essentially give it for free if they signed onto the contract.
Gotcha, that's cool.
So you're reimbursed, basically.
Yeah. But we've been reevaluating that recently and deciding whether or not we want to just have that as a straightforward paid engagement, just so it's very clear that there is a true value to that.
Yep.
That process.
It takes time.
You're signing. I mean, they're investing in ownership at that point.
Right. And we're interacting with their systems and networks at that time. So there is a potential risk to us as well.
You have to have a something contractual before you touch any systems, obviously.
Correct.
Awesome to hear. Thanks for calling out that trend. So let's keep on going into this next setting. Again, it's going to be very similar here, but clear history for IE. Oh yeah, Edge webinar. Talking about IE still, Internet Explorer. So, and IE mode, every time you exit is set to disabled. So again, this is saying keep the history.
Dude, I think I think it's supposed to be set to delete, not disabled.
Oh, did I document this one wrong? Calling me out on a live webinar, Rich. This is stuff for the pre-show and the post-show.
It's supposed to delete IE when you close it.
Delete the IE. Well, I will also call out, CIS does have a recommendation on the OS itself to disable IE entirely. So that's an additional.
That's what I'm talking about. So
that is an additional recommendation
IE,
that
it deletes itself.
Yep, you could do that on the OS level as well. So Henry, very similar to the other settings here, but anything you want to add?
Yeah, I believe another aspect to this and preserving that history, though, is around business compliance regulatory requirements.
Yep, government has told me they can't use that setting sometimes, and some of our MSP partners who service them, hey, this application only runs on IE. I can't handle this setting.
It happens. Yeah. All, exceptions again, right?
Yep. Finance institutes enter the chat.
Yikes. Yep. So spot on. Again, exceptions are needed sometimes. And, even if you allow for that setting on the OS so that IE is still available, if you harden this one, right, you're at least now reducing a little bit of that risk, right? Because if you're using something, at least then do the complementary controls to still harden the risk. Cool. All right.
Harden to minimize the risk, bro.
Harden to minimize the risk, because you accepted risk no matter what. And anyway, layered security, defense in depth. All right. We're switching topics finally. So the next one here, configure in private mode. Configure browser process code integrity. I got ahead of myself. Guard setting is set to enabled. Enable code integrity guard enforcement in the browser process. This one definitely sounds critical because it's saying we want code integrity. But Henry, explain what this is actually saying here.
So I believe what we're speaking to here is around supply chain attacks. So man-in-the-middle type of attacks as well, where some type of browser add-on or code gets compromised by a non-certified third party.
Yep, absolutely. So this is really just saying if you're going to be utilizing this, make sure it is being enforced, making sure it's actually what it's supposed to be doing, right? I mean, it's like, I don't know, a security guard at the front of a factory checking the IDs to make sure each person is not going to be causing harm when they're allowed inside, right? So it's just in another checks and balance almost to make sure we are using the right pieces. We're letting the right code be involved.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Next setting here, we got, if I can keep my things in order, we got configure in private mode availability is set to enabled, in private mode disabled. So this is, again, we're talking about edge hardening. So I believe this is probably the same as incognito mode in the Chrome browser. This is just edge version. Why don't we want to allow in private or incognito on these browsers here?
So this is getting to some of the earlier slides where we're talking about we wanted to make sure we wanted to have that audit data, forensic data available, and this would be a way for someone to bypass that, whether that is the end user or the potential attacker.
Yep, exactly.
Previous comments.
Excellent. Yeah, it was foreshadowing, right? These settings, it's like they all tie together, and if you do one, it's not enough. You got to do all of them. Anyway, sorry, plugging that there. If you have the top 20 most important configs, it's a great starting point. But OS alone, there's about 500. Edge hardening, there's about 120. Don't stop at 5.
No
Don't stop
deal.
at 20 settings. Do all of them, or at least make a best effort. So, very, very much important here to talk about. It's basically not allowing to turn off all the lights in a house and let people sneak out, right? You want to watch people leave. You want to know, hey, there is a audit trail, right? This whole concept, like why if we have all
I mean,
the audit
people invest
policies,
pretty heavily in log management and things like that, right? This is
So
an
if
extension of your log management ultimately.
if we're investing into log management and we have our SIM solutions, our SOAR solutions, don't we want them to ingest as much as possible? So why would we allow a backdoor to hide some of this information?
That's it.
Yeah, it's the accountability and monitoring piece of it, and also with a lot of the cloud tools that we have nowadays, need to consider the data loss prevention aspect of things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one piece I also am
No
working
joke.
with the insurance on companies about, because a lot of these settings are DLP related settings. You know, you don't think about it because you just read this technical phrase here, but they relate to bigger objectives that you have.
Yeah, if someone's working in private mode and they're going to Dropbox and just, doing whatever they're doing, it'd probably be good to know about that.
Probably be important. All right, let's get to this next
Saying.
one here. Ensure configure online text to speech is set to disabled. Shout out to the new mobile app of ChatGPT. We got a ton of that going on nowadays. Very hot topic. But why maybe do we not want text to speech to be available? This definitely sounds like a convenience if I needed something like this, but why is it a little dangerous?
I believe we're looking at preventing accidental exposure of information with this. You may or may not want it to necessarily start off with the text-to-speech feature there, but it may invoke itself and accidentally expose private information, PII, to people around you.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. How popular is the work remote culture? I mean, I think I asked, oh man, I can't remember. I know I asked you. Is that your home or your office behind you, Henry?
Yeah, this is my office.
So that is your office, but all of us really are working remote, most of us, I should say, not all of us even in this room, but we work remote a lot. And whether it's an employee or one of your clients taking their computer to a Starbucks or a cafe, right? This text to speech auto invoke, right? If it is a compromised device and a bad actor wants to play a game, a high school kid playing a prank, maybe invokes the text to speech. Important stuff starts to be
kind of funny. It could be kind of funny.
I'm not here to advocate one way or the other. I might chuckle, but it is possible. So that's the thing. We joke about these settings too, and it's fine to have fun, but at the same time, right? These are real risks we're talking about and could totally be leveraged for comedy. Like that high school bad actor might truly be doing it in a non-malicious way.
Yeah.
Accidentally
it's funny,
releases.
non-malicious. It's the malicious part, not so funny.
Right. The output of it, someone might be in the right place at the right time. Be like, oh, that's information. I'm glad the kid doing it for fun did it at that moment.
Yeah. I mean, would you want your tax information being read off out loud?
Pass.
Yep. Pass. Hard pass. All right. I think we're at the last setting here today. So this last one here, we are going to be talking about configure related matches and find on page is set to disabled. So, I mean, if I'm looking for something and I find the something, I don't think I want additional choices here. Is that what this is saying?
Well, again, this gets back to the profile building that cross sites are able to do some of that tracking. But there's some privacy and filters bubbles that you can avoid with this as well. So at least for me on the privacy aspect side of things, that's kind of more pertinent than some of the targeted tracking and advertising pieces of it that I'm sure CIS is more interested in. But yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily want that information leaking out there. Yep,
absolutely.
Agreed.
And that concludes the technical portion of the settings today. Woo! We did it. All right. So now we get to talk a little bit more about the MITRE attack technique. So something really cool, if you didn't catch this at the start, that CIS does, it actually maps these settings directly to the MITRE attack techniques. So very much a hand-in-hand relationship there. And all of the things we talked about here are directly related to the MITRE attack techniques listed on this screen. This is not hypothetical. If you have just the dozen settings we talked about today, you're lowering your risk profile to these explicit attack techniques, right? This is very real. This is real. This is truth, right? Henry, you talked about a lot of attacks along the way. So you're completely welcome. If you want to just talk a little bit more towards the preventative benefit of having the CIS benchmarks, or if you even want to call out some of these attack techniques, man, whatever really comes to mind here.
Yeah, I guess really from a larger picture, understanding that you have some prescriptive way of addressing these attack vectors that is not just because you felt a certain way or that you were marketed a certain way in redeeming against them, but that there is a true standard and framework that you can follow that addresses these MITRE attack vectors, because these are the ways that attackers are going to try and break into your system. So,
and these vectors evolve over time. This isn't static. And CIS is we have a very close relationship with MITRE, and we're working hand in hand with MITRE figures out the the most recent and common attack vectors, and we adjust the settings to keep the bad guys at bay.
Yeah, and one thing, a conversation I had this morning, Teddy, I believe his last name's Guzik, but founder of Shield Cyber. So they are a company that does perform vulnerability scanning and even some of these configuration scannings, right? They have a unique process because they don't necessarily create a prioritized schedule based off of CVEs alone. They are actually a firm of pen testers, and they will put some priorities higher than a CVE if it's constantly exploited at the misconfiguration level, right? So
Log4j, for example.
Yeah. So talking about, configuration hardening, vulnerability management, those are two subtle, but they are different, right? I think the term Teddy uses is exposure management, meaning configs, versus vulnerability management, meaning CVEs more. But do you have any takeaways on how MSPs need to prioritize this? Like, it's overwhelming as it is with just vulnerability management. Now we're saying to configure all of your assets as well. How do you manage this?
So I think the reality of our industry right now is that it's growing in a complexity in a way that MSPs can't manage it all on their own anymore. They need to find people to partner with, either in specific knowledge areas or enacting some of these controls. So I know,
and amongst each other, right, Henry? Like what PAX 8's doing. I mean, they're a for-profit company, but it's somewhat of a MSP community service what they're doing to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely.
That aspect of it is for sure more of a community service, because Senteon as a company is part of that program they're doing, right? And we are not in the PAX 8 marketplace, right? This is truly Matt
We're
Lee's
not either. I wish we were.
Matt Lee has definitely done his best to keep this more of a standalone community service, as opposed to putting paywall barriers, right? He wants this to truly be a security minded project,
so cool.
which is super cool, right? And to get to have the ability to push back on a behemoth, right, and say, hey, this is the only way this will ever work, and win that battle, or consistently win battles of that war. Hopefully he keeps on fighting. But
he's a battler.
That's the cool thing about what they're doing over there. So definitely very much agree and echo the sentiment.
Yeah, and there's a huge education piece to it as well, both from the MSPs as far as understanding what knowing what you don't know, and using that to identify those partners and solutions out there that can help fulfill that.
Matt's also a huge part of that, right? Our boy Matt Lee.
Yeah, very much. He's busy. All right, let's get to this last slide here. So kind of wrapping up, we talked about a ton of the security aspect, a ton of the privacy aspect. If I'm an MSP and, I'm trying to make profit and revenue, does hardening really enhance anywhere other than security? Is this something that should be an add-on? Or do you see this as something if you have an asset, you are responsible to configure it? Like, talk to an MSP who's never done hardening and why they might want to begin prioritizing this.
So I think gone are the days of sticking your head in the sand and thinking that this doesn't matter, that it's on the end user for clicking on the thing they shouldn't have clicked on. Like, you are contractually obligated as the responsible party for securing that endpoint and doing your best due diligence for that end user in organization. So I think you're seeing this shift in the MSP market for sure, where MSPs are starting to realize that, hey, we've got a duty similar to a family physician does to the end user or to the client.
Health of the business, right?
Yep,
There literally is.
And this all gets back to a bottom line dollar value at some point, and truly addressing this and coming up with some type of mitigation discussion with your clients is no longer something you can ignore.
Let's talk about coming back to your bottom line dollar, right? It's obviously going to be an uplift of time, unless you, of course, use Senteon, right? You can automate it, but you still have to pay Senteon, right? There's going to be a cost associated with performing a security service. So, when you have all these settings in place and all of your assets are configured the same way in a perfect world, that's the end goal, right? Is there any operational gain? Is there any actual ROI on configuration management?
Yeah, I think so. One, you've got standardization across your client base or devices. So that from that side, it's a lot easier. But you also have the defensibility in personally, I get to sleep a little bit better at night. But knowing that you're doing everything that you should be doing to try and protect and mitigate against some of those risks that are out there. So if God forbid something did happen, at least you have documentation and can show that defensibility that in your decisions, and hopefully, if nothing else, it helps reduce that total exposure that may have happened.
Yeah, and you have that that proven automation that is continuous, which is so important because things change over time. Systems aren't static, and you kind of need that continual attention, and it's very, very hard to do without proper automation.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's one of the big
have all to achieve all of those gains that Henry's talking about. It's critical because all of that depends on having that historical view and system that can continually keep everything current and do the proper reporting that compliance requires.
And while it may be getting easier for end users and how they interact with some things like automation or AI, on our side, it's definitely not getting easier. It's definitely more complex day after day. And understanding and kind of projecting what those future risks might be to the end user, whether they recognize it or not.
The easier experience your clients have probably means the more complicated your back-end job was to get them there. And same thing at MSP to client, from MSP to vendor, same thing applies for us. The easier your front end is, means we put a lot of time.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, very much
no free
appreciate.
Ride, Zach? What are you talking about?
I'm telling you guys, I promise changing 3,000 policies. There's not an easier route we've discovered yet. We wish
That's
there
what you
was.
got your Henry for.
Yeah, Henry will give plenty of feedback. He's been a great friend and advocate through what they're doing with us. So very much.
In Senteon.
Yeah, you're Henry.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, confusing. We always get that confused internal too. Too many. Anyway. All right. Well, that is a great capital ending to this presentation. So, Henry, thank you for being here. We got about a minute and a half left. I'll start wrapping things up. But is there anything you really want to leave the audience with, whether that's a trend you're seeing or just, again, advocate for the CIS? Anything you want to leave?
I would just say make sure that if you're not familiar with CIS or the MITRE attack framework, go look them up. There's free resources there for you to start digging into, and you don't have to do this overnight. We certainly didn't. We're still in process of getting where we want to be, and this is just something that eating that elephant one bite at a time. But there are also vendors out there, such as Senteon, that expedite and make that a lot easier to digest.
I mean, this is coming
from more, if you're going to go down that path, and those were great suggestions Henry made. Take a look at the Verizon data breach report too. Add that onto Henry's list, and you've really got a fast start to really the risks out there.
Yep, absolutely. And this is and Henry's closing thoughts right there, right? That's a very mature MSP who's really gone through a large chunk, if not at least reviewed all of it. And even he's recommending, do a little bit at a time, right? He himself maybe isn't 100% through CIS, right? And that's okay to admit. We don't, it's an ongoing thing. So 100% is arbitrary. You should always be close to 90. Anyway, but that's
Henry,
the
we'll
point
talk
here.
After. We'll get you set up,
Yeah,
bro.
that's the point. Even someone who is prioritizing this talks about it, preaches it, recommends people follow it. Even he, as a mature MSP, is still working towards that end goal. So
it's not
kudos
easy.
on those
Stuff's
closing
not
thoughts.
easy. It's work.
It is work. So
it's training.
Thanks for the
make it so hard. Why'd you make it so hard, Rich?
Yes,
Just messing
absolutely,
with you, bro. You know that.
All right, let's go ahead and pull up this last slide. Henry, absolute great guest. Rich, glad you could join. But let's make this full screen. So next week we do have Roddy Bergeron, another tech degenerate, coming on the show. Honestly, I was joking with him yesterday. We need to get him a green jacket, like from SNL. He's gonna be the first 3-timer on the webinar series. Why Roddy keeps coming back, I'm not sure, but he knows his stuff.
The people need their Roddy.
The people are asking.
Great guy.
We got Tara Wheeler from Red Queen coming and Brad Powell from Threat Captain coming afterwards. And again, if you enjoyed this week's episode, please come back next week. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you want to check out Senteon, please feel free to take advantage of the free offer we provide. You get 100 free internal or external assessments. I even have partners who bill for those free assessments. So free ROI for you if you want to take advantage of it. But